Heath Douglas, and here on today's show, we have a very famous or possibly infamous case, which involves a lot of mystery, intrigue, and tons of twists and turns that honestly, when I was even reading through the case personally, it had me on the edge of my seat. I would like to welcome a Mrs. Amanda Large. Amanda, thank you so much for coming to the show today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, no worries. So there is a lot, and I do mean a lot to talk about today that we're going to get into with a very eye-raising story with one Ian Bailey, who has been the center of attention in a murder case that has practically gone international with its own Netflix and Sky documentary series called Sophie, A Murder in West Cork on Netflix. And then there's Murder at the Cottage, The Search for Justice for Sophie on Sky Crimes Channel, which if you do guys have those respective accounts, you can definitely check those out where you can watch those cases and, find out, the story about who he is, the woman he's accused of killing, and much, much more. And of course, we will be asking Miss Amanda about that as well and kind of her advocacy for him, kind of how she's been involved within it. But before we get into all that, just want to highlight our sponsor. And then, of course, is this network's own coin, the FoxD coin. FoxD coin is a total community-driven coin with no premier and no developer's wallet that is keeping the coin hidden behind a wall. FoxD is a 100% transparent coin that is open to everybody, and it makes it where it's a coin for the people, by the people. And the unique advantage that the FoxD coin offers is what we're utilizing right now, the FoxD network. The coin gives everyone the opportunity to get seen on our network and gives your content a chance to shine, with your audience growing with you and, of course, with the network. We're always accepting new guests, streamers, and contributors for the network. So if you would like to expand your brand, you know what to do. Check us out on our website at foxdcoin.com. That is Fox, the letter D, coin.com, where you can download all your own wallets. Or if you want to buy some coins yourself, you can find us on Bilaxy, Crex24, BitSales, FX, and Free Exchange. All right, Amanda. So for starters, go ahead and just tell us about yourself, who you are, where you're from, your background, and so forth. And especially also the story of kind of how you came into this investigation, along with what you possibly can tell us about the case itself, because like we were talking backstage, this is an open investigation. So I understand there may be some things that you may not be able to divulge due to kind of legality of it. But kind of tell us about, for the folks that don't know, who is Ian Bailey, his story, and basically how you kind of came into all this.
Okay, so I'm a publicist. I was born in the UK in England, but moved to Ireland when I was quite young. So I've worked in the media for probably about 30 years, and I've ran campaigns before. I ran a campaign for an Irish celebrity called Linda Martin, who got fired off a TV talent show for ageism. And I got 100,000 signatures for that petition. That was back in 2007. I've done a lot of advocacy for animal rights, organised quite a lot of protests, including one that involved a drag queen jumping into the Liffey River in Dublin and swimming across it. So that was interesting. And that was in 2019. And I'm also an autistic woman who only got a diagnosis in her 40s. So I do
Wow.
quite a lot of awareness raising for autistic adults as well.
Mm-hmm.
So along with my publicity work, which obviously involves promoting artists and that, I
Sure.
do activism work. I feel very passionate about people's rights, I guess, and about if I feel people have been treated unjustly.
Mm-hmm.
So how I got involved in this case is during lockdown, as you can imagine, the promotion end of things is it's kind of quiet because there's not many events and there's not much taking place. So I decided
Sure.
that I would start a YouTube channel, and I would do videos on different crimes in Ireland. Because there's lots of crimes on that happened in America, like the Elisa Lam case, and
Mm-hmm.
even the White House farm case in the UK, but there wasn't really much about Irish crimes. So I started to look into a lot of Irish crimes, and the one that I put more research into before this one was probably about Ireland's Vanishing Triangle, with Annie McCarrick being a very famous American woman who actually went missing in the Vanishing Triangle. So that was quite popular. So then the documentaries, as you say, came out on Netflix and Sky, and I initially wasn't going to do a video because Jim Sheridan's documentary, which is Murder at the Cottage, I was like, well, I'm not going to do better than Jim Sheridan. So
Right. All
um,
professionally done, all the professional microphones and cameras,
yeah. But so I watched it. I watched it, and I was very, very taken in because, as you say, it is such an unusual case. I've never came across in all my research on cases before. I've never came across one quite like this. So then I realized it was one on Netflix too. So I binge watched that directly after the Sky one.
Wow.
Away very much with the feeling after watching Jim Sheridan's, I felt Ian Bailey's innocent. Then I watched the Netflix one and I felt it was very biased the other way. And I was coming away saying, I'm kind of getting guilty vibes from this one. So that really had me intrigued then. So I was like, I really want to know more. So there's a thing called the West Cork podcast, which is very,
Mhm.
very detailed. And there's many books as well on the subject. So I started to dig in. And obviously the more I read and the more I studied the case, the more I really felt very, very convinced that Ian was innocent.
Mhm.
So then I felt, look, I want to make a video about it, even though I'm not going to be better than Jim Sheridan's. I
Sure.
about this. So I did. And it turned out to be my most popular video on YouTube, getting thousands and thousands of views, because all my other videos didn't really have that many views because it was only a new channel. So at that point, I decided that I was going to actually contact Ian Bailey on Facebook and just tell him, look, I've made this video about you, just really out of a respect thing, because
Sure.
I've had people make videos and stuff about stuff that I've done and not really ask me about it or give me a chance to even look at it and say, well, it's factual or it's not factual.
Right.
So I just, out of a respect thing, just said, look, I'm going to send him a link to the video and just say, hey, listen, I think you're innocent, and fair play to you for having gone through and been strong through this for 25 years. I didn't really think he would accept my friend request, or I didn't even think he would. And then he did.
Wow.
I was like, oh, okay, right. So then we got into a very brief conversation, and I said, look, what would you like to happen here? And he said, I would like this cold case to be reopened. I would like a reinvestigation because, I want to clear my name.
Right.
So I said, well, actually, I ran a campaign before and I got 100,000 signatures. The power of the people, the power of public opinion is very, very strong. So how would you feel about me setting up a campaign to try and make this happen? So he said, well, thank you very much. I'd really appreciate
I
that.
would assume so.
So that's how it kind of started, really. So then I went into full publicist mode. How am I going to make this happen? How am I going to get people to sign it, and how am I going to present this in a way? Because, like you said, it's such a complex case, and it's very hard.
Sure.
People engage with stuff that's really, really long, so you have to try and put it into bite-sized pieces for people to get it. So I started to make little smaller videos showing some of the discrepancies that happened in the case. And we're now up to 15,000 people in a month.
Wow.
So, and just me running the campaign just for one person. So I don't want my head to get too big here, but like I do.
Sure.
And it does show that people are on his side, that people are kind of seeing, that there is injustice here.
Sure.
So I suppose, to talk a little bit maybe about the case now, might be a good idea. So
sure, go ahead. I mean, like I said, divulge as much as you can, because again, like I said, I know this is an open investigation. So again, for the viewers out there, again, it is a reopened case. So just saying that there may be some things that may not be divulged openly. So whatever you can share with us, by all means do it.
Sure. So in 1996, Sophie Toscan de Plantier was married to Daniel Toscan de Plantier. He was quite a famous French director, film director. Um, she had a holiday home in Cork, West Cork, near Skull.
Mhm.
And a long, long way, the other side of Ireland to where I live. I've never been down to West Cork. Um, but it's a very rural, very remote, and at that point in
Right.
time, it being a very backward kind of place, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so sorry, just a
No, it's
notification.
okay. No worries.
So yeah, so she had a holiday home here, and she used to visit on a regular basis. So she visited in December 1996, and on the morning of the 23rd of December, her body was found at the bottom of her gate. She was in
Mm.
her night clothes, but she had her boots on, and she had been bludgeoned to death with a concrete block.
Wow.
Um, so nobody really, there hadn't been a murder in this area for over 100 years. So the
Mm.
Gardaí had absolutely no idea how to
Right.
handle a murder investigation. And because it's in such a remote part of Ireland, it took 24 hours for the forensics teams to come down from Dublin. So the body was left out in the elements for 24 hours before being forensically examined, which
Wow.
is, I mean, I'm sure in America that must actually seem unbelievable that
Right,
that
because in even like in
actually
the American
happened.
movies, yeah, it goes so quick.
Yeah. Yes, yes. I mean, imagine that. I mean, 24 hours it takes for a forensic team to get down there. And that's a whole story in itself. But to cut a very long story short, they did what they could. They took whatever,
Mhm.
fingerprints or DNA that they could at that time. But like I said, they kind of didn't really know how to do it, and they made a lot of mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
So they were really wondering, what had happened. It was quite suspicious that Daniel, her husband, did not come over after she died to identify her body or even see her body. It was Sophie's family who came over, and then it transpired that her marriage was not terribly happy at the time when she died.
Mm.
So people were saying, was he involved potentially? He did get married
Sure.
quite quickly again after her death, and he didn't really seem to be that bothered. But he had a strong alibi, so then they were looked at the idea of a hitman very briefly, that it was a hired executioner, but because it
Mhm.
was in such a remote area, they were like, would somebody that was hired
Right.
executioner find? But my point would be, yeah, if you're a hired executioner and you're getting paid enough money, of course you'll find it. you know,
You would think
like,
so, you would hope so.
yeah, so to me, that isn't really an excuse. Well, it couldn't be somebody that was hired because they wouldn't find it. But like, I mean, if you're getting a huge amount of money, like you'll make it your business to find it if that's your line of
Right,
work.
of course.
Yeah. So to me, that really wasn't, and that was just marked off with that no, because a hired executioner wouldn't find it. Let's forget about that lead. There were lots of different leads, like there was a blue car seen speeding in the area that morning, and there was lots of things, but none of these leads were really examined properly because
Mhm.
very early on in the investigation, Gardaí decided that it was Ian Bailey, and they were going to make it stick. And even quoted on saying that to people that they were going to make it stick. So you
Wow.
might say, well, why was Ian singled out? Because I suppose that's the next question. Why
Sure,
Ian,
yeah.
and why logs down the road? Why did they pick Ian? So
Right.
if you can imagine, back in Ireland at that time, Ireland is divided. Part of Ireland is in the UK, part of Ireland is in the Republic. So there was still
Right.
at that time quite a lot of xenophobia around English people. Um, Ian is English. He was actually a very, very successful journalist, wrote for all the top newspapers in the UK, had his own news agency. But through some personal things, issues in his life, he became very disillusioned with the rat race, and he decided that he would relocate to an area in West Cork to just kind of live a simple life and become a poet because
Right.
poetry is his big love. Um, so he moved to West Cork. Now Ian's a very tall man. Ian's about 6'4". So he is quite a, he
Stands
stands
out like a
out.
sore thumb almost.
I wouldn't maybe put it like that, but he's an obvious kind of person because
Oh, for
because he's
sure.
tall. He also has he's kind of he's got a personality that's very big.
Hmm.
So he would go into a pub and start reciting his poetry. He dressed very alternatively, with
Hmm.
big hats and looking like John Wayne. That's actually one of his books. It's called John Wayne's State of Mind. So
Sure.
he had a long black coat, maybe a bit of Johnny Cash going on there as well. But he had a very
Right.
alternative kind of style. And let's say this made him stand out very much in this small rural area. And people
Hmm.
very much kind of, I think a lot of what was said back then was, he didn't try to fit in. He didn't, he was always looking for attention.
Right.
And I don't really think he was always looking for attention. It's just who he is. He's an
Oh,
alternative
for
person, maybe
sure.
a little eccentric, but I don't think he was deliberately trying to annoy people. It's just who he is. And
Oh,
why
yeah.
should he change? That's what I'm saying. I'm alternative, and I've kind of gone
Right.
through something similar in small villages. People would be like, oh, you're too loud, or you're too full of yourself, or I've got that all the time. And
Oh,
it's a
yeah.
kind of Irish thing, but people like you to kind of fit in and just, not be kind of putting yourself out there too much. It doesn't make you popular, particularly in rural areas. And that would have been Ian.
Hmm.
So of course, being a little eccentric, the first thing that people said, oh, it must have been a madman that did it. It must have been somebody that was crazy. And who's the only crazy person that we know in this village? Ian Bailey. Um,
Sure.
so the finger started to point at him. That was one of the reasons why the finger started to point at him. Now, some crazy stories came out. Like, I mean, you're talking about crazy, saying that he thought he was a werewolf and he used to howl at the moon. People saying, that he was appropriating Irish culture because he tried to fit in a way, because he
Right.
used the name Owen as opposed to Ian, which is the Irish version, and they were like, oh, he's appropriating Irish culture by using an Irish version
Right.
of his name. And Ian loves Ireland and loves Irish culture, and in no way was he being disrespectful. If anything, it would have been, as a sign of respect or flattery towards Ireland, because he's
Hmm.
very much Irish identifying, even though he is from England. Um, but yeah, I mean, some crazy, crazy stuff was said about him. And the more the gossip mill kind of started to turn, the more crazy stories that were coming out. Ian, like I said, was an investigative journalist in the UK. So when this story came up, one of the local newspapers in Cork contacted Ian because he was the only person with any journalistic experience that lived in the
Right.
area. And they asked him to go and do some investigation and to come up with some stories, which he did, because that's in his nature to do
Hmm.
it.
Yeah.
And as he started to investigate the story and get stories published, this made people suspect him more, because they're like, well, how does he know this? And how did he know that? And he wrote this story and he's inserted himself into this. So, in
Hmm.
a way, by doing his job as an investigative journalist, it kind of, it made him more of a suspect to
Right.
the local people and the Gardaí. So this, I think, is when it kind of really went awry, so to speak. One of the editors of the newspapers rang him up about, I think it might have been a month or 6 weeks after the murder. I'm not 100% sure of the timeline.
Right. Sure.
But it would have been like in the wake of the murder. One of the editors of the newspaper rang him up and said, Ian, do you know that you're a suspect in this case? And at that point in time, it was a bit of a shock to him, because he was like, well, he didn't know, and he thought it was so crazy. And he has a dark sense of humor. He has got a dark sense of humor. And he said, yeah, of course it was me. Sure, I did it for a story. And that was literally taken as a confession.
Right.
Now, maybe that was a joke, maybe a joke in bad taste, but I mean, he clearly
Right.
wasn't
No, I know.
serious.
Yeah.
He was kind of making fun, I suppose, of how ludicrous he thought the idea was.
Right.
Um,
Sure.
well, then at that point, he's getting arrested and he's getting questioned, and he voluntarily gave his DNA. His DNA did not
Right.
match any DNA that was found on Sophie. There was literally nothing, not really
Hmm.
any evidence whatsoever to link him to it, apart from gossip
Yes.
and speculation. There was no solid evidence whatsoever to link him ever even actually having spoke to Sophie. Um, so the DPP in Ireland, which is the Department of Public Prosecutions, they make the decision based on the Garda files. So the Guards sent all this files in, all about witness statements about his behaviour, and then there was another
Hmm.
lady who came forward to say that she had seen a man with a long black coat around that
Ah.
area. And Ian owning a long black coat. But in her original statement, she said that the man looked Middle Eastern and had sallow skin. And she said he was about 5 foot 8
Oh.
or 9. So that does not fit the description of Ian whatsoever.
Obviously,
Apart
yes.
from a long black coat, that was the only thing. But the guards insisted and insisted it was Ian, it was Ian, it was Ian. So eventually she said, yeah, okay, it must be Ian. But all of this was all sent into the Department of Public Prosecutions twice, and
Hmm.
twice they threw it out. The DPP said, "No, there is no evidence. We're not going to try him. There's just nothing. It's just circumstantial. There's really no
Yeah.
evidence." I mean, part of evidence that was sent in was some psychic who told that a woman called Sophia. She didn't even get the name right because it was Sophie, not
Right.
Sophia. Sophia had came through and told her that Ian Bailey had murdered her. And this was, can you imagine this drivel being sent in to the Department of Public Prosecutions? A psychic who
Right.
can't even get the name of the victim right. I mean, it
Uh,
just bears belief that these cops weren't fired. Like, if I was the
yes.
Department of Prosecutions and I read this, I would be like, bring these men to me till I fire their ass, you know? I mean, it's
Yes.
crazy. Yeah, I mean, but anyway, I mean, so you can see why I've gotten into this so much, because I'm
Oh,
like,
for
I just
sure.
can't
Yeah.
believe this really happened, like for real. So anyway, so it kind of died down then, and it was like, okay, he's not getting prosecuted, but the fingers were still pointed. He was still getting a lot of hate
Hmm.
around where he lived, and he still does to this day. My God, the abuse he gets on Twitter and everything, it's crazy. But anyway, the family, Sophie's family, were really pushing and pushing and pushing because they wanted to find out who murdered. They wanted to find out,
Yes.
particularly
Of
Sophie's son when
course.
he got older. He really wanted to know who murdered his mother. He was a teenager when she died. And I can understand that. I mean, grief is a terrible thing, and anger
Hmm.
is a part of grief, and you want somebody to pay for what's happened, and I do
Yes.
understand that. So they requested the Garda files in France. So the Garda files were all sent over. But the original Garda files, because by the time the files were sent to France, you're talking about years later now, years later. I'm
Yes.
not sure how many years, but you are talking about this being years later when the files were sent to France. A lot of those witnesses had retracted their statements, including the woman with the long black coat, who said that it probably was Ian. She had changed that completely and said, actually, no, it wasn't Ian. The guards just convinced me to say it was Ian. She had completely,
Wow.
and she insisted that the man was Middle Eastern looking and that it wasn't Ian. So she had retracted that, and other people had retracted their statements. But the guards never updated their files, so they just sent the original stuff over to France. So when the French justice system was looking at all this, they're thinking,
Right.
oh my, Ian is a crazy man. Oh, he was seen. This woman said it was him. And none of it was updated. So they're looking at very, very old files. So they decided to call upon an old law, an old Polyanic law, which if a French citizen is murdered anywhere in the world, the person that's the suspect can be tried in France in absentia, which means that the person, the suspect, has no defense and isn't even there in the courtroom. So they
What?
decided, yes, for real. This is what I'm saying.
Oh my
It's
God. I've never
crazy.
heard of that. Just to be, I've
Me
never, I mean,
neither.
again, American law different than French law. So that's,
Well, over here in Ireland and the UK, we very much is to work on the same model as American, innocent until proven guilty. And
sure,
there has to
sure.
be, reasonable doubt, and there has to be like a good balance of evidence to convict somebody. Which in a
Yes.
civilized society is absolutely right. But in France, this type of a trial, it's also called an intimate trial. It's not based on factual evidence. It's not based on evidence at all. It's based on the feelings of three judges who preside over the case. So you're talking about a case for somebody who isn't even there, who doesn't have a defense, and the judges base their decision on their own emotional feelings. How crazy is that?
God,
So the trial went ahead.
I'm just speechless. I really am. That's just,
Yeah,
wow.
it is. So the trial went ahead. And they convicted Ian and sentenced him to 25 years. So he's actually convicted in France.
Wow.
So they tried the European arrest warrant for him. So he can never leave the Republic of Ireland. He can't even go to Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. He was unable to go to his mother's funeral in the UK because if he leaves the Republic of Ireland, he'll be arrested and brought to France to serve 25 years.
Sure.
On this trial. So they did try to extradite him to France, but Ireland's justice system said, no, we don't recognise that version of a trial, so no, we can't extradite him. But they can overthrow the French judgment, so he's protected in a sense while he's in Ireland, but he can never leave the state. So this is, this is where we're at now. And I mean, so where I'm coming in here with the campaign is I'm saying, look, he's been convicted in France on false information because that wasn't even an up-to-date file, because half of that isn't even relevant, and how, with the main witness statement, had been withdrawn. So how should that have been allowed in evidence when she had withdrew the statement? Plus taking as a confession something that he said, oh yeah, I did it for a story, which is something I'd say, honest with you, if I was in the same situation. Because Ian isn't completely neurotypical. He's he's his own person, and he's very unique.
Sure.
And very alternative. And I totally see where he was coming from, and I totally see the humor in that. Even though it was a little dark. But I mean, to be convicted of murder on that without even a defense, I think is absolutely crazy. So, but obviously, I can't change, or we can't change the French justice system here in Ireland. But what I want to see happen, I want to see this case reinvestigated, because first of all, there's lots of leads that the guards did not even follow through on.
For sure.
They had already decided it was Ian. That's number one. Number two, forensics has came a long, long way since then, and it has transpired that there was DNA found on one of her boots, but at that time it wasn't enough to have been analysed. Perhaps it would be now. Ian has voluntarily given his DNA, and none of his DNA matched anything on the crime scene.
Wow.
So if the DNA and the forensics was redone, that would help clear things up.
For sure.
And then all the statements that have been withdrawn, all the crazy statements like, oh, he's like, he had it off with 10 lesbians and this kind of nonsense that's totally relevant to the case, which was said. Apparently he was on a
really
lesbians reading them.
Oh my gosh.
For real, like a naked man with 10 or 12 lesbians, like that's the last place you'll find 10 or 12 lesbians. Sorry to upset all you guys, like, but that's the last place you're gonna find them dancing around to poetry for a straight man. No.
Right.
Maybe the
Gosh.
person who said that was in their minds that they'd like to be around 10 naked
Right.
lesbians who were watching to Pornhub or something, but it never happened. It's all nonsense. So all those kind of ridiculous statements that were damaging to his character, all of them should be completely taken out of the Garda files. And I believe if all this was updated and resent to France, the France would have to relook at it and say, well,
For sure.
that conviction was done based on false evidence. So that's the ultimate thing that we would like to see happen. And obviously, if the new investigation turned up something that potentially the killer could be found, I mean, that would be amazing because that would be justice for Sophie.
Oh,
But,
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, because her killer is out there. Somebody did it, and
Right,
there's no
right.
justice for Sophie until there's justice for Ian. Because if Ian didn't do it, whoever did do it's still out there walking around.
Oh,
And
exactly.
I don't believe she can rest in peace until at the very, very least, the person who has spent 25 years of his life trying to fight this has his
Mhm.
name cleared. Because I'm sure Sophie, if you believe in the afterlife, I'm kind of on the
Right.
fence. But, if you do believe there's an afterlife, I'm sure that's not what Sophie would want, is that somebody's life was
Yeah.
ruined falsely. So the campaign is called Justice for Sophie and Justice for Ian because I believe that both of them are interlinked. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. So I have written to Sophie's son, who obviously lives in France, and I've asked him to support the campaign because
Mhm.
I believe that even though he very much believes in the French verdict and he believes that Ian is guilty, I
Right.
just feel because his decision and his belief is based on false information that he has gotten from the Gardaí. So I've kind of said, look, what's the harm in supporting the campaign to have the case reopened?
Mhm.
If you're correct and the French decision was correct, well, then that can only strengthen it.
Right.
But if you're wrong, somebody's life has been
Right.
ruined here. Not just maybe give the benefit of the doubt to Ian here and support the campaign to get this case reopened. So I only have contacted him in the last couple of days, so I haven't heard anything back yet. So I don't know how that's going to pan out. But I mean, I would like to see that. I would like to think that he would be open
Mhm.
to justice being served properly. Even as I said, if he does think it is Ian, there's no definitive proof. So I just don't see why anybody, whichever side they're on, would have an issue
Right.
with a reinvestigation because it can only bring out the truth.
Oh,
Um,
mhm.
so we're at 15,000 now, people, supporters, and it's growing all the time.
Sure.
So, and as I said, it's only a month. It's very early. That's very early days for a campaign, really. So I think 15,000 in a month is really really good, and we're obviously getting more international coverage now.
Right, which is great.
And obviously with the documentary coming out in America, Jim Sheridan's documentary is coming out in America in September. I'm sure that is going to pique interest
Mhm.
in the over in America. Um, so I just feel the more people, it's a shame. I mean, imagine the embarrassment it must be for the Irish Gardaí too, that
Oh,
people in
yeah.
America all over the world are seeing what an absolute joke of an investigation this was. Even to make themselves look better, surely they would want to relook at this and say, well,
Right.
we want to kind of clear our name as much as clearing Ian's name because
Exactly.
as I said, what I told you, imagine when people in America are looking at this and thinking what like idiots the guards were in this situation, like taking
Yes.
they even put in the statement that dogs were acting strangely around Ian that night. Like
Hmm.
for real. I mean, absolutely really stupid stuff. So yeah, I really think it does need to be just go back to the start, go back to
Mhm.
scratch, and just cut out all the nonsense and just look at what the real hard evidence is. And the hard evidence is that Ian there's nothing to connect Ian to this murder whatsoever. I mean, he's lived with this for 25 years. He's lived with abuse from people. He's lived with, now with social media, as we spoke backstage about trolling and,
Hmm.
how easy it is for people to say horrendous things to you online. And I mean, he's very strong and he's very tough. And, I think he's learned
Right.
to be able to, separate himself from it to a certain extent. But there is no doubt about it. I mean, it has massively impacted his life. I mean, he's very creative. He's a poet. He's written 2 books of poetry, which is like really good. His poetry is excellent.
Hmm.
From an artistic point of view. And I mean, I just feel that people see him as the suspect in the Sophie Toscan de Plantier case. They don't
Yes.
see him as a great writer. They don't see him as a poet. They don't see him for the things he should be known, because he does have a huge personality, and he just does have, when you kind of meet people like I've met Eminem, for example, and you just know, wow, this person's amazing. This person has real
Yes.
talent. You get that with Ian. It's just like, that person has talent. They have that kind of, they just have that aura about them. And I
Right,
just
for
feel he's
sure.
known for all the wrong reasons, and he hasn't really had the opportunity to maybe, be the person that he could have been had all of this not
Right.
happened.
Well, and and you talk about with his case and kind of really how he's been portrayed, because one of the articles that I had actually read from the Irish Mirror is that Mr. Bailey had stated in the Netflix documentary version of this case is, and I'm quoting this from the paper itself, is he said,
Yeah.
quote, "It's a piece of self-serving, demolishing propaganda because they only showed him briefly in the Netflix version, while on the other hand, the Sky documentary had given him a lot more time." And so what I'm wondering, and I guess what many people are maybe wondering as well, is in regards to your cause, and which is his cause, do you think that there can be a bit of biased play with cases such as this, where you can have certain people see him in one light and then others in another light, where it might possibly damage your guys' fight to get him clear to the charges?
Absolutely. The Netflix one, Ian did not take part in whatsoever. In fact, he didn't even want the pieces of himself that they used in it.
Hmm.
And I think his lawyers and stuff are looking into that at the moment, because he didn't really give permission, I don't think, for it to be used the way it was. Because yes, the Netflix one was all about sensationalism, and it was very, very biased.
Hmm.
Even when I watched it, I'm just glad I watched the Sky one first, maybe, and not the Netflix one, because
Right.
where what my opinion might have been had I watched the Netflix one.
For
Although
sure.
I'm pretty open minded, but yeah, I can understand people who have only watched the Netflix one being biased. But here in Ireland, it's very, very extreme. There's people who are absolutely passionate about him being innocent, like me, and then there's people who
Hmm.
are absolutely passionate that he's guilty, and it's a very, very polarized
Sure.
opinion here in Ireland. And I definitely think absolutely the Netflix documentary, if that's the only one people have seen, definitely does
Right.
not give a balanced view of it. And I mean, when you learn about journalism and everything, you learn that all articles are meant to be balanced. There's meant to be,
Hmm.
it's meant to go both sides. But the Netflix one, for me, and I would say for a lot of people, really doesn't. It definitely was done in a way that they wanted the viewer to come away feeling that Ian was guilty.
For sure. And I think to a part of that, there is kind of in any sort of media, is you want that sensationalism because it gets the clicks, it gets the views, it gets that notoriety that people are going to delve into, spending that extra time, because Netflix, obviously you pay for it. So, you get people reeled in to pay for it. And so I think in some cases, like again, specifically with Ian's case, is you have it where the media, excuse me, the media, specifically Netflix, is getting that story to be sensationalized to get people to, really care, really buy into more of the product, then buy into the story. And so you see instances
Yeah,
where,
about
unfortunately,
you. It's about, getting people to watch it. It's about creating, controversy. It's not really about the
right.
truth. But that's
Yes.
that's the entertainment business, isn't it? That is the entertainment
Hmm.
business. A lot of movies that's even been made about things that are real life. You know, they change this and they change that, and you'll see at the end, it's not
Right.
completely. But, they, it is not really about finding out the truth or portraying the truth. It's about getting the viewers and creating the most sensational kind of
Hmm.
story that you can. So, yeah.
Oh yeah. And something I wanted to go back to, you had mentioned about with the DNA, is even in the trailer for the documentary, which honestly I was reeled in just from watching just the trailer alone. Is it had mentioned
Mhm.
even in the first couple of minutes of the trailer that there was no DNA at the scene of the crime. And understandably, being that this was 1996, DNA and forensic work overall, that was just not as developed nowadays as we have, with all these advanced steps of, not just DNA, but things like fingerprints and soil samples that investigators can check with dirt and all this sort of stuff.
Yes.
Has there
Oh, yeah.
ever been at this time, with now that the day and age that we have, has there ever been in your mind, over and over and over again, that has said, like, recheck the evidence, but with today's technology, and like you said, have them go back to it and say, no, this is the real evidence with the new DNA. Quit going back to the 95 case and reopen it now.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of the evidence, like for example, there was a big farm gate, a 6 foot farm gate that had blood on it.
Mhm.
That's gone missing.
Oh,
And how
really?
could a 6 foot gate go missing out of evidence? So there are items that are actually missing out of evidence now, which is a big issue.
Right.
Also, the black coat, because one of the main investigating officers is quoted on Netflix as saying, Ian burnt the coat because there was a bonfire at where he lived
Right.
and the coat was burnt. We never got the coat to take DNA off it. However, in the evidence that Garda files evidence, they did get the coat because it was put into evidence and they still have the coat.
Oh,
So there's a direct contradiction, even just from Netflix,
golly.
I've made a video. It's on my page. People can see it. Where I have the guard saying, "Look, the coat was burned.
Mhm.
That's why we never got any DNA. We never got it." And then in another part, another guard saying, "Here's the paperwork to say that we found the coat
Right.
and we have evidence, and it was tested forensically."
Wow.
I mean, that's literally they've literally done that publicly on TV. You know,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, I could literally make a video of it. They actually tried to get me to take that video down, and they
Oh,
actually sent me
really?
a legal letter telling me to take it down, and I refused, and I just sent it back, and I was like, no, because it's fact, it's educational purpose, and under fair usage, I
Sure.
can use it because you have literally, you've literally contradicted yourself in your own show. So yeah,
Yeah,
so they had
that's
me to use it. So it's still up there for people to look at. It's just, I think it's the reasons why we need an investigation part one. But people will find it on the page. So I mean, so this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to pick out all the contradictions because there's
right.
literally so many contradictions in it. There was another case where in France, a woman, she's now a woman. She would have been a teenager, I think, at the time. She stayed
Mhm.
in their house at the time of the murder, and she said that Ian had like washed this black coat, and she had noticed it because it was a big woolly coat, and it would have been incredibly difficult for him to try and dry it and everything. And it sat there in this bucket soaking like all over Christmas. But yet
Mhm.
there's a video that was taken of Ian on Christmas Day, and he's wearing the coat. So clearly it wasn't sitting
Wow.
in the bucket because he's wearing it on
Right,
video.
exactly.
So, but yet her
Gosh.
evidence was accepted in the French trial too.
My
So,
goodness.
you know,
Well, no, and that's amazing. Well, and kind of something too, you even talk about how, this is now 20, well, I almost want to say almost 30 years now, because time's flying by. It's almost time for what, 2026 eventually. is,
Oh
you
Lord.
know, being that the murder, so we're almost 25, nearly 30 years removed from 1996. And even though this case is still going on, is, and I think, and I know myself, and I think a lot of people
My
would want to know
battery
as
is about
well.
to die here. My battery is about to die.
Oh, so okay. Well, sorry. Well, we'll just wrap it up with this then. Well, before your battery dies, before you go, is there anything else that you know you'd like to tell people? We'll definitely have links for the site as well for the video and everything. But is there anything else? Again, unfortunately, before your battery dies, is there anything else that you would like to kind of give
Go
people
on
a last
to the
minute thing?
page. Go on to the page. If you support the campaign, give it a like.
Okay, awesome, awesome. All right. Well, unfortunately, with the battery dying, I guess we'll leave it with that. I think her battery just did die. Maybe had a little bit of freeze here. But guys, again, thank you, Amanda, so much for coming by. We definitely enjoyed it. Guys, also, you can definitely watch the video again on all of our social media. Thanks so much for stopping by, and have a great rest.